It is lovely to be with you this morning. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me a thumbs up, someone, if you can see that. Excellent. Thank you, Peggy. So this morning's workshop is called the 10 Warning Signs of Alzheimer's and Dementias. It's normally a much longer workshop, so I just thought we would dive in with one of the first questions that comes up very often in this workshop, which is Alzheimer's or dementia. What's the difference? Are those the same thing? Are they different? And so really the first thing to know is that dementia is just a generalized umbrella term. And then there are specific diagnoses under that. So Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. There's also vascular dementia, which is associated with strokes in the heart. There is frontal temporal dementia, which is a dementia that directly affects the frontal lobe of the brain. We tend to see it with younger individuals, and it will often affect mood and personality. And you might see that somebody has sort of a flat affect and they've sort of changed how they interact with people, a really interesting dementia. And then the fourth that's really common is Lewy body dementia, which you might think of as sort of similar to Parkinson's dementia, where Parkinson's often starts with movement disorders, and at the end, you may have a Parkinson's related dementia. Lewy body starts the opposite direction. So first you have the dementia symptoms, and then later you experience the movement disorders. One thing I like to share that I think might be helpful is dementia, the term itself, is almost like saying soup. So it's just a general term. It's not a specific diagnosis. It's not like chicken noodle soup or tomato soup or Italian wedding soup. Those are the specific diagnoses. So if ever you're talking with someone or a loved one comes back from the doctor and they say, oh, I have a diagnosis of dementia. Dementia is just that generalized term. Is that helpful start?
Yes.
Excellent. Good. Thank you, Jim. Something else to think about before we dive into the warning signs is that very often, I think, people will think of dementia or Alzheimer's or frontal temporal simply really as a memory disease. But all of those are whole brain diseases. And so they will affect not only memory, but maybe how we visibly perceive things, or our mood, or how our brain actually processes information. So I think that's helpful if we are maybe seeing a long lost friend or visiting with a family member who has some form of dementia, is that we need to think about not only memory, but how the whole brain is affected. So let's dive in to the 10 warning signs. And as these pop up, I'm going to ask, and I don't know if this is common for you all, but I'm going to ask if any of these just jump out at you as surprising or interesting. And I think you all in the room can see the screen as well. Is that right? Okay, great. So who wants to either jump up in front of the mic or unmute themselves on Zoom? Any of these really catch your eye first, or something that says, gosh, I didn't think that was a part of it? Go ahead and share. Susie, how about you? What do you see here? Anything jump out?
Oh, so my mother has had dementia for the last 5 years,
Yeah.
and they all look really familiar.
Yeah.
I guess the one that we're thankful hasn't been an issue is number 10, the changes in mood and personality. Like,
Yes.
except that maybe she's become so, I don't want to say childlike, but each day is a new day. And so even, when she had COVID, she'd wake up, forget she had COVID. She felt great, didn't know there was a pandemic. It was
Yeah.
no problem, and she got through it pretty easily. So I guess we're thankful that her mood hasn't changed in the opposite direction, like I've heard happens often. But and I didn't realize that was one of the symptoms because we haven't seen it yet.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Susie. I saw somebody in the room at the screen. What did you want to share? Okay, maybe not. How about one more person? Yeah, go right ahead. No, go ahead. Okay, maybe not. Okay, let's dive right in. So number one is not simply memory loss, but memory loss that affects daily life. So for the people on Zoom, show of hands if you've ever been in a scenario and you're like, oh, I know her, but I don't know her name. Exactly. And do you ever get that panic like, crap, I'm forgetting names more often, and sometimes I use the wrong word, and I wonder if that's it. The thing to think about here with memory loss is really when it's affecting day to day life. So, forgetting important dates or events, increasingly relying on coping tools. So, there was a great story when I first started facilitating workshops for the Alzheimer's Association of a woman that was forgetful often enough that she would just wear her apron around all the time because it had pockets and she could keep her cell phone in it and her notebook and her pencil. And so she had built up sort of this coping mechanism to get around that memory loss that affects daily life. Sometimes you'll also see sort of a repetitive aspect of asking the same questions over and over again, telling the same story over and over again, sort of getting in almost like a loop. So that's the first warning sign. The next is challenges in planning or solving problems. So in this one, I think about things that we've always been able to do well. Now I sort of stumble over. So maybe you think about the first bullet is trouble with a familiar recipe or keeping track of monthly bills. There was an example in the earlier version of this workshop in which a lady, I want to say she had a master's in mathematics, and that was her profession. And she started to notice difficulties when she went to balance her checkbook and was having difficulty doing that. Now, if I have difficulty balancing my checkbook, it's not really a warning sign for me because I haven't done it in probably 30 years and it's just not in my skill set anymore. The second item or second example is difficulty concentrating or taking much longer to complete tasks. A loved one of mine has always kind of been a slow mover. But I was with him about a year ago and it was at lunchtime and he was making his lunch. And I swear it took an hour to prepare everything. Everything just got like exponentially slower. He really had to like process each step. Um, we also have on each of these slides what is typical, what is not a warning sign. So a typical age-related change would be making occasional errors. It's not like you can't ever make a mistake, but it's when you start to see, either in yourself or others, things that you normally have been able to do successfully now are either taking much longer or you're starting to get tripped up on regularly. The next warning sign is difficulty completing familiar tasks. So number 2 and number 3, I think are pretty similar. They're at least similar in my brain. Um, so maybe Larry has lived in the same neighborhood for 40 years and always gone to the same pharmacy or the same faith community. And then he's driving along and he has difficulty sort of remembering, or he takes the wrong route, or he gets turned around. If it's sort of that location that you've done for so many times, and then that you start to have difficulty connecting or getting to the right place, that can be a warning sign. But gosh, if you're like the woman who shared her story in moving from Philadelphia to Colorado, I'm sure she got turned around many times. And that is not a warning sign. So you think of the things that are sort of you've long known or long been able to do. Remembering the rules of a favorite game. When I worked in senior living communities, I would often hear stories of, gosh, we started to notice my aunt always loved bridge. She had her regular bridge group. They would meet every week and they would tell stories and play and sort of tease each other. And then I started to see, or I was hearing from her friends, that she was starting to misstep on the rules of the game or get kind of short or snappy if somebody was distracting or telling too many stories while she was trying to concentrate on the game. So, difficulty completing familiar tasks. Number 4 is confusion with time or place. So this one is interesting. It can show up in a few different ways. Very often in the middle or the later stage of the dementia journey, our loved one or ourselves or our friend may more be sort of almost more emotionally present at an earlier time in their life. So I live in Longmont now. I'm in this home. I work in with large senior living organizations, but maybe I'm more mentally, emotionally in my first flat when I lived in St. Louis, and I loved that flat, and it was on Olathe Avenue, and maybe Peggy and I are friends, and she says, "How are you?" And I say, "Oh, I gotta get back to my flat." And I've sort of that's the space I'm in mentally and emotionally. But the other sort of flip side of number 4 is that sometimes we'll see a warning sign in which people tend to really mix up time and schedule. So, one of my colleagues in Missouri, I think it was his grandmother, the sign that they first caught on is that she would always show up at appointments at the wrong time. She used to be meticulous, get there 10 minutes early, be prepared, have everything together. And then they started to see she would show up 2 weeks ahead of time or 3 days late or just always kind of off for something that she was always very specific. Make sense?
Yeah.
Number 5, I think is the most interesting. Just me personally. Trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. So as you're thinking through these warning signs, sometimes at this point in the workshop, there sort of is building this panic like, oh, dang it, I'm starting to see, I've already seen 2 of these things in my spouse or in my good friend that I used to work with. And so I would say the beauty and the action and the purpose of this workshop is to point out what's sort of normal and what are things that are, gosh, I'm starting to see more of those in my loved one. And then to take that next step to go see the physician, to get everything checked out. The nice part here is that some of these things that are warning sign actually can be rooted in other bodily issues. So maybe there's a nutritional deficiency, maybe there's infection or some other disease going on. Sometimes depression can show up very much like these dementia symptoms. So as we're talking through, if you're starting to see these numbers building either in yourself or in others, it's not time to panic. It's just time to set an appointment and get sort of these other things checked out. So number 5 is trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. And this can show up a bunch of ways. So spatial relationships, maybe I have always been, well, I'm kind of a slowpoke driver. I always sort of accelerate slow. I always start braking early before the intersection. I kind of annoy a lot of people around me when I'm driving because I'm just kind of, I want to save the brakes sort of thing. But if Michelle starts to notice that we're in a car together and we're coming up on the intersection and I sort of like, she sees that I'm coming up faster than I normally would. And it almost seems like I'm not processing how quickly we're coming up on that intersection. That can be a warning sign. Difficulty with balance, that one can be a warning sign, and it can be a warning sign of 1,000 other things. So that's a great one to sort of keep in your mind. Sometimes it can also just be literally how I process what I'm seeing. So maybe it's sort of getting in dusk and I'm seeing the lights are on inside, but the curtains are open and I'm seeing the reflection in the window. And I think, oh, is there someone outside? But it's my reflection. So these, I think, can be really helpful warning signs because I think we often don't associate them with dementia or Alzheimer's or other specific diagnoses. Number 6 is new problems with words in speaking or writing. And I specifically want to highlight here frontal temporal dementia. Frontal temporal is the one I mentioned first that affects the frontal lobe. And sometimes we'll see mood or personality change, a flat affect. Frontal temporal is where maybe Jim hates when I wear green, but he normally just keeps that to himself. Instead of mentioning my green, he goes, oh, I love those earrings you're wearing. But with frontal temporal, Jim would say to me, why do you wear green? Like it is the worst color on you. You look sick. You look all washed out. That's a warning sign of sort of that lost filter. Also, sometimes with frontal temporal and with other dementias, you'll see problems with words or speaking. But with frontal temporal, sometimes there's something called primary progressive aphasia. And that's where I literally have the words appear, but it is the physical act of speaking them that I have difficulty with. So a gentleman I worked with in Seattle, he had aphasia, and it was fascinating because as he was speaking to me, it all sounded right to him. But what I heard was just mumble and sounds and just sort of chopped up pieces of words. But to him, it sounded clean. Number 7, misplacing things and the losing the ability to retrace steps. So for people on Zoom, show of hands, have you ever walked in the kitchen and then you're like, why am I here? What did I come in for? Yeah, good, Jim, Larry, good, all of us. So the key here, this isn't a test, this isn't a warning sign. The key here is, are we able then to kind of look around? Or if you, Jim, I don't know if you do this, or Larry, I just leave the room sort of close my eyes, open up, walk back in, and then like, oh, right, coffee, that was it. You sort of like reset your brain. So that ability to retrace or sort of re-enter the room and see it, that's not a warning sign. But maybe Shelly and I are in a home together and I'm putting away the groceries. And Shelly's like, holy moly, she put her purse in the freezer and the ice cream in the cabinet. So those things that sort of like almost right, but not quite. That's definitely a warning sign. You think of some people when they get home, they sort of have that landing strip. So they put their purse, put their keys, put their notebook, always in the same spot. But maybe you start to see instead of the keys in the landing spot, you find the keys in the fish bowl or in the fruit bowl in the other room. So things that are kind of, you can almost like see where it's similar, but it's not quite right. So number 8, decreased or poor judgment. And sometimes we'll see this in people getting scammed, but not always. Sometimes it's a sense of this number 2, less attention to grooming. So I always look kind of slightly disheveled, but imagine Jim is always, always, always put together, never a hair out of place, glasses always shiny clean. And then you start to see like shirt sort of buttoned wrong and sort of food on the face and just hair kind of a mess. Those are good warning signs. 2 left. Number 9, withdrawal from work or social activities. And this can look like during the pandemic, this one was harder to see because so many of us withdrew. And then as we're starting to re-engage, sometimes we're kind of awkward and clumsy. But withdrawal from work or social activities, that might look like maybe Sam and I have a tradition every Wednesday. We go out for coffee, we sit on the sidewalk, and we talk together and share stories about the week. Maybe Sam starts to see in me that I'm having trouble sort of staying focused on Sam if we're in the coffee shop and there's a lot of noise. You know, we can sort of hear the barista, hear other people talking, kids going by. I sort of have difficulty keeping track of everything around us. And maybe I start to say like, Jim, I don't know. I don't know if I want, or Sam, I'm sorry. Sam, I don't know if I want to go to coffee anymore. So sort of that pulling back from scenarios that are maybe too loud or busy or too many details to process. That can be a warning. And the number 10 is the one that Susie mentioned, which is changes in mood and personality. And sometimes we can see this confusion, suspicion, anxiety. Sometimes that can show up specifically in a couple of the dementias. Lewy body and Parkinson's related dementia very often will have this suspicion or paranoia or even a hallucination element to them. But it could just be quicker to be short-tempered. I mentioned before about the frontal lobe, and Jim starts telling me every time he hates when I wear green. We start to see sort of this shift in, gosh, she's just not the person she's always been. And this one I think is helpful because I don't think we often think of it as a warning sign. We just think like, oh, well, you know, it's been a hard year, or, you know, we all change as we get older. But this is a good one just to sort of keep in your pocket. This one can be a little fuzzy to keep an eye on. So as we think about the warning signs, I just want to encourage you all, whether you're seeing them in yourself or your loved one or your neighbor, just encourage those people to take that step to go to the doc, get checked out. Sometimes it's something so simple that can be addressed. And other times, if it is Alzheimer's or another dementia, even more important that we know now so we can make a good path forward. Sound good? Excellent. Thank you, Peggy. Oh, we can't hear you in the room.
Questions?
Okay, we have time for some questions, and Kevin, come on up.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I appreciate it. Oh, I love you too. Whoever put that on the computer here. Sorry, there's a little sticky note distracted me. So just a quick question. This is a concern I have for my mother, who is 73 now. And I'm just curious, talking about a lot of the warning signs, what are some of the things? I mean, she's still very active and definitely keeps her brain very busy. She still works part-time from home and things of that nature. But I'm just kind of curious, what type of mental activity should she be doing from a prevention standpoint?
Excellent. Good. Kevin, was it?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Great question, because so often we'll get that question like, is it enough to do the crossword puzzles? Like, what is it? How can I exercise this and not just this? The good thing to keep in mind here, if I am lifting weights and it's so easy and I'm like, just no effort whatsoever, is that good exercise for me?
Maybe, not really.
It's fine. It's not really stretching me with brain exercises. We all know those people who do the crossword every day. It's just sort of how their brain works. It's not even hard anymore. So she wants to do those things that are going to be a little bit difficult. So maybe that is reading a difficult story. Maybe it's putting together a puzzle. Maybe it's going into her favorite part of the house and reorganizing everything. Just stuff that's going to be a stretch.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good, Kevin. You're welcome.
At the value of luminosity?
Say that again, Jim.
Is that the value of something like luminosity?
Oh, that's a great question. I have heard about luminosity, but I don't know too much about it. It's sort of like a brain teaching game sort of thing.
Many different games that challenge different aspects of the brain.
Excellent, Jim. I love it.
And you can never get 100 on the test.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
Yes. That's why I like to play solitaire. I can get 100 on solitaire occasionally.
My dad asked me once, you win a lot at solitaire. I said, no, I just cheat. So solitaire is not helping you and I, Jim, but luminosity probably.
Luminosity, it's the fun games that are mentally challenging in different aspects.
Excellent. Good, Jim. Anyone else?
Any other questions or comments? Mike's coming up.
Mike.
Great presentation. Thank you very much. Could you clue us in a little bit on some of the research going on and some of the studies? I had signed up online to be a volunteer for something, instead of DNA thing, which I never understood. But I haven't been selected, which I take to be a good sign. But can you tell us what's going on and what hope there is for finding a cure?
Yes, excellent. Super exciting. A lot of really great research going on. Some right near us in Anschutz. Really cool stuff being done with the concept of possibly type 3 diabetes and the connection between diabetes and Alzheimer's. Some really cool research being done at Anschutz with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. There's a new drug that's being tested at Anschutz, and I'm flaking on the name, but you can definitely either go to the Alzheimer's Association website or call the 24-hour helpline and ask them about that. The Alzheimer's Association is one of the biggest funders of research in the world, and not just for Alzheimer's, but for all dementias. And so there's been some really exciting, frankly, really basic research of just whole body health and how that is a great preventative measure in limiting Alzheimer's and other dementias. So that's been exciting as, just doing all the right things, like Jim said about stretching the brain and eating well and getting good sleep. That has become interesting, at least to me, because it's not sexy or flashy, but that's been really an exciting bit of research that's come out. There is still no drug or med that either slows the progression of Alzheimer's or halts the disease. The meds we have now only manage symptoms. So the hard part about these main dementia diagnoses is that we don't have a cure yet. But I'm super confident we will, because there's such a need.